He inherited only an old warehouse, but when he broke through the concrete floor, everything changed. What was hidden beneath had been buried for almost a century. Watch until the end to see how one man brought the truth to light. Subscribe so you don't miss any new stories, and write in the comments which city you're watching from. The morning sun had barely lifted over the low roofs of Grayville when Marcus Reed wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted the strap of his hard hat. The air smelled of dust, diesel, and metal. Another day, another concrete pour, another 12 hours of lifting, hammering, and being spoken to like he was part of the machinery. The construction site had become the rhythm of his existence, a place where time blurred into the sound of drills and the weight of repetition. He didn't complain, didn't drink, didn't cause trouble. He was the man who got things done and asked for nothing. For most of his co-workers, Marcus was invisible, the quiet, dark-skinned man who ate lunch alone and left the site when the sun dipped behind the gravel mounds. His life had become a pattern he didn't think to question. The small trailer he rented sat by the edge of the highway, its walls rattling whenever a truck passed. Inside, a cot, a radio, a tin mug, and a few framed photos of people he hadn't seen in years. He didn't have a family to visit, or anyone to talk to except the static voice from the old radio each morning, giving weather reports and local gossip. Still, there was a kind of peace in his solitude. The world couldn't disappoint you if you expected nothing from it. The only person who ever broke through that silence was Henry Howard, the site foreman. The old man was nearing 70, his hair gone to gray, his skin marked by years of labor. Unlike the younger supervisors who barked orders from a distance, Henry worked beside the men. He laughed loudly, cursed louder, and had an old-fashioned sense of fairness that didn't bend with hierarchy. "You swing that hammer like you're trying to talk to the concrete," he once told Marcus with a grin. "That's good. Concrete listens to patience." Marcus didn't respond then, but the words stayed with him. Henry wasn't a man of fancy talk, but he noticed people, especially the ones others ignored. Over time, they fell into an unspoken friendship. After shifts, when everyone left, Henry would linger with Marcus, fixing old tools, repairing the site's aging generators, sharing lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos. Marcus never said much, but he listened. Henry spoke about the past, the way the town had been built, the land deals, the promises that had made a few rich and many forgotten. "You ever wonder," Henry said one evening, "who owned this dirt before us, before all the trucks and concrete?" Marcus shrugged. "Never thought about it." Henry nodded slowly. "Most people don't. That's how they keep taking it." A few weeks later, Henry didn't show up for work. By noon, the foreman's assistant came around with the news. Heart attack in his sleep. It hit Marcus harder than he expected. There weren't many people whose absence he could feel, but the old man had been one. The following Saturday, Marcus attended the funeral. It was small, held under a sagging tent behind the town's only church. The air was heavy with rain, and the grass sucked at his boots. There were only a handful of attendees, Henry's wife, a few relatives, and 2 or 3 workers. The preacher spoke softly about a man who built foundations that will stand long after us. Marcus stood silent, hat in hand, watching the coffin sink into the wet earth. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, his name printed neatly across the front. Inside, a notice from a law office in town. He was requested to appear for the reading of Henry Howard's will. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, confused. He wasn't family. He wasn't anyone. Still, curiosity led him to the lawyer's small office, a building that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The lawyer, a thin man with round glasses, adjusted his tie nervously. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Mr. Howard made some specific arrangements before his passing. He shuffled through a stack of papers until he found the right one. According to his will, you are to receive the property at Lot 27, the storage building and the half-acre it sits on. Marcus blinked. A storage building? The man nodded. An old warehouse on the edge of the new development. It's rather run down. Marcus didn't know what to say. The lawyer pushed a single sheet of paper toward him to sign, then handed over a set of rusted keys. He said you'd understand when you saw it. The words meant nothing at the time, but they lodged in his chest like a splinter. That evening, Marcus drove out to the lot. The road narrowed into gravel, bordered by scrub and half-finished foundations. The building appeared from the mist, like something half-abandoned by time, an iron-sided structure with peeling paint, windows clouded with dust, and a sagging roofline. The padlock on the door had long since rusted. He pushed it open, and the hinges groaned like an old man waking. Inside, the smell hit him first. Damp cement, oil, and rot. It wasn't empty. Tools hung from nails along the wall, buckets of nails, bent pipes, old barrels, and a mountain of lumber stacked in the corner. It looked like the ghost of every job site he'd ever worked on. He walked deeper, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. The light that seeped through the cracks in the walls caught the haze of dust in the air. For a moment, the place felt almost alive, as if it had been waiting for someone. Marcus picked up a wrench, wiped it on his sleeve. The metal left a streak of rust on his skin. "Guess you wanted me to have your junk, old man," he murmured. But something in him resisted leaving. The silence inside the building was thick, but not empty. It carried the weight of intention. His eyes drifted to the far corner of the floor, where a rectangular patch of concrete looked different from the rest. Slightly lighter in color, smoother, as if poured more recently. He crouched down, running his fingers across it. The edge caught his touch, a faint ridge, barely visible. He tapped it with a knuckle and heard a hollow echo. The sound made his stomach tighten. He pressed harder, then stopped, realizing his pulse had quickened. Probably just uneven fill, he whispered to himself, but the air felt different, heavier. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the concrete patch kept returning, the sound of the hollow thud repeating in his mind. He stared at the ceiling of his trailer, listening to the hum of distant cars. Henry's voice drifted back from memory. Some things are buried because people want them forgotten. The next morning, Marcus clocked out early and stopped by a pawn shop. He spent half his paycheck on an old power drill and a chisel. When the cashier raised an eyebrow, Marcus just said, "Fixing something." By dusk, he was back at the warehouse. The light was fading when he started. The drill screamed against the concrete, sending shards and dust flying. Sweat rolled down his face, mixing with grit. Every few minutes he stopped to catch his breath, listening for the echo. Finally, the bit struck metal. He knelt, heart pounding, and cleared away the debris. Beneath the surface, a dull gray outline appeared, a rectangular lid made of iron, flush with the floor. He scraped the edges clean, revealing hinges so rusted they looked fused. After several tries, the lid gave a reluctant groan and lifted an inch. The smell that escaped was stale, like the inside of an old trunk left in the rain. He leaned back, breathing hard, staring at what he'd uncovered. Beneath the floor, a dark cavity yawned open. The edge of a box gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam. He hesitated, unsure whether to keep going. The rational part of him whispered to stop, to cover it back, pretend he'd never seen it. But another part, the one that had spent years buried under work and silence, pushed forward. He reached down and brushed away more dust, until the outline of the box became clear. It was old, metal, sealed with a strip of dried wax, and stamped with a faded mark. The initials HH pressed into the seal. Marcus felt the breath catch in his throat. Henry had put this here. Whatever was inside, the old man had wanted him, not anyone else, to find it. He sat back on his heels, the warehouse quiet except for his breathing. Outside, night had settled over the valley, and the first drops of rain began tapping on the tin roof. The sound echoed softly through the building, steady and rhythmic, like a pulse under the earth. Marcus didn't open the box that night. He sat there instead, staring at it, feeling the air grow cooler around him. It wasn't fear that kept him from lifting the lid. It was reverence. He didn't know why, but he sensed this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was something deeper, something that reached beyond him. When he finally locked the warehouse and stepped back into the rain, he looked once more at the keys Henry had left him. The metal was cold in his hand. The old man had always spoken in riddles, but now, for the first time, Marcus thought he might understand. Some gifts weren't meant to be easy. Some truths needed to be dug out of the ground, one layer of concrete at a time. As he walked back to his truck, the storm rolled in over the hills, low thunder following him home. The warehouse stood behind him, silent, its roof shining wet under the lightning. Somewhere beneath that concrete, beneath all the years and lies, something waited. He didn't know it yet, but that night marked the end of his quiet life and the beginning of a reckoning that would make the earth itself remember who it once belonged to. The following morning, the rain had washed the town clean, leaving the streets slick and shining under a pale winter sun. Marcus sat in his truck across from the warehouse, the engine idling, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The memory of the iron lid beneath the concrete had haunted his sleep, returning in flashes, the weight of the air, the hollow echo, the smell of rust and damp earth. It had taken everything in him not to return during the night. Now, in daylight, the warehouse looked less like a secret and more like a challenge, its corrugated walls dull and pitted, its windows black with grime. Somewhere under that floor was the box Henry Howard had left him. Marcus didn't believe in fate, but he believed in work, and whatever this was, it needed finishing. He pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of oil and rot greeted him. The hole in the floor was just as he had left it, ringed by crumbled chunks of concrete. The iron lid waited in the center, marked by the faint impressions of his boots from the night before. He crouched down, fingers trembling slightly as he pried it open. The hinges groaned again, releasing a stale breath of trapped air. Beneath, the box lay nestled in the dirt metal, rectangular, heavy. Its surface was mottled with corrosion, but the seal still held, stamped with the letters HH, the old man's initials. Marcus dragged it out, coughing as dust filled the air. The box was cold to the touch. He fetched a wrench from the workbench and carefully pried the edge until the lid gave way with a metallic pop. Inside, the air smelled of paper and time. He blinked, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracked window. The box was full, not of money, not of gold, but of something far stranger. Bundles of papers, bound with twine, envelopes yellowed with age, photographs wrapped in wax paper, and, on top, a single envelope with his name, written in a shaking hand. Marcus Reed. For a moment he just stared. The handwriting was unmistakable. Henry's looping letters, the ink smudged as though written in haste. He tore it open carefully. The letter was short, the words uneven but deliberate. Marcus, if you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. This land you're standing on isn't mine. It never was. It belonged to your family a long time ago. I found out years back when I was still young enough to be angry about it. I kept the records, the proof, and I waited for the right person to come along. Someone who wouldn't sell it for silence. You work the way your grandfather did, with your hands, and with dignity. That's why this is yours now. The truth is buried deep, and the people who built this town made sure it stayed that way. Don't let them bury it again." There was no signature, just a small smudge of oil at the bottom of the page, as if Henry had written it between jobs. Marcus sat down heavily, the letter trembling in his hand. His grandfather. The word felt foreign. His own father had never spoken much about family, just that their roots had been burned away by time. But as Marcus unfolded the first bundle of papers, the lie began to unravel. The documents were property deeds, dated nearly a century earlier. The name on the top line stopped him cold. Elijah Reed, his great-grandfather. The deed listed ownership of nearly 50 acres of farmland, rich, dark soil, along the same ridge where the new housing development was now being built. But there were more pages beneath it: transfers, sale contracts, legal filings, all stamped with the same date, 1929. The signatures changed, but the language repeated itself. Property ceded under duress, compensation rendered, settlement final. Marcus flipped through each sheet, heart pounding harder with every line. It was all there. The theft disguised as legality, the erasure wrapped in bureaucracy. The land had been stripped from his family, repackaged, and resold over generations until no one remembered who had first broken its ground. He set the papers aside and pulled out a stack of black and white photographs. Men stood in front of a farmhouse, their faces solemn. One of them, tall and lean, stood with a hand on a shovel, his features sharp and unmistakably familiar. Marcus traced the outline of the man's face. The resemblance was uncanny, the same brow, the same quiet expression. On the back of the photo, in faded pencil, was a single word: Elijah. There was something else beneath the photos, a small wooden box sealed with a latch. Inside lay a folded map, drawn by hand, showing the contours of the land as it had been then. The ink was faded, but one phrase was still legible in the corner: RF Boundary, Reed Farm, 1908. He realized with a jolt that this was the original map of the property, before any of the modern developments existed. The boundaries stretched far beyond the current construction zone, encompassing land that was now worth millions. Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to process it all. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him. This wasn't just about ownership, it was about history, about being erased. He could almost hear Henry's voice again saying, "You ever wonder who owned this dirt before us?" Now he knew. But the question remained, what was he supposed to do with it? He wasn't a lawyer or a politician. He was just a man with calloused hands and a box full of ghosts. By evening, he sat in his truck. The documents spread across the passenger seat. The headlights from passing cars flickered across them like flashes of memory. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself, but he also knew that showing it to the wrong person could make it disappear all over again. The next morning, he made his choice. He took the box to the site office and asked to see the construction manager, Phil Lawson, a man in his 40s, with a permanent smirk and a gold watch that didn't belong to someone who worked for a living. Phil leaned back in his chair as Marcus placed the box on his desk. "What's this?" "Something Henry left me," Marcus said quietly. "It's about the land." Phil opened the box, flipping through the papers with idle curiosity. His expression changed as he read. "Where did you get these?" "Under the warehouse floor." Phil's smile vanished. He set the papers down carefully, then met Marcus's eyes. "You shouldn't be showing these around. You understand what this is?" Marcus said nothing. Phil leaned forward, voice lowering. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. You don't want to stir this up. The company's got lawyers who eat people alive for fun. Whatever you think this means, it won't end well for you." Marcus crossed his arms. It means this land was stolen. Phil sighed. It means you found something that could cost a lot of people a lot of money. So here's my advice. Forget you ever saw it. Hell, I'll even pay you for the trouble. He opened a drawer and slid out an envelope, thick with cash. Consider this a thank you for keeping things simple. Marcus stared at it. For a long moment, the temptation hung in the air. It would be easy to take the money, to walk away, to let the ghost stay buried. But Henry's words echoed in his head. Don't let them bury it again. He pushed the envelope back. I'm not selling silence. Phil's smile tightened. Then, you're selling trouble. 2 days later, Marcus was fired. The reason was project restructuring. His tools were handed to him in a cardboard box, and the rest of the crew avoided his eyes. He didn't argue. He just took the box and left, knowing what it really meant. When he got home, his trailer door was ajar. Inside, drawers pulled open, papers scattered. Someone had been there. The box was gone. His chest tightened with panic until he realized the real documents. The originals were still in his truck, wrapped in oilcloth under the seat. Whoever had broken in had found nothing but empty envelopes. That night, Marcus drove back to the warehouse. The wind howled through the cracks in the metal siding, and the moonlight fell in pale strips across the floor. He sat on the same spot where he'd first uncovered the box, the concrete now broken and uneven. He thought of Henry again, his steady voice, his quiet integrity, and of Elijah Reed, whose land had been taken and whose name had been forgotten. Marcus took a deep breath. The fear that had clung to him all week was gone, replaced by something heavier but stronger, a resolve born of exhaustion and defiance. He gathered the papers, wrapped them tightly, and buried them again beneath the floor, sealing the lid shut and pouring new concrete over it. The truth was safer in the earth for now. When the last layer dried, he sat back against the wall, his hands gray with dust. The warehouse was silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. He didn't know what came next, only that he couldn't run from this. Henry hadn't left him a burden. He'd left him a key, and Marcus intended to use it. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping softly on the roof, like the slow beat of a drum. The land had waited nearly a century for someone to listen. Marcus intended to make sure it would never be silenced again. Days bled into weeks, and Marcus lived as if under a shadow. He worked odd jobs where he could, hauling materials for small contractors, mending fences on the outskirts of town, anything that would keep food on the table and gas in his truck. The warehouse stood locked behind him, silent but alive in his thoughts. Beneath its new layer of concrete slept the truth he could no longer ignore. Every night he felt its pull, the weight of what he'd buried there, history, proof, memory. Sometimes he dreamed of Henry, leaning against the doorframe with his crooked grin, saying, "You gonna keep digging, or just let them pour over it again?" It was those dreams that pushed him toward a decision he'd been postponing. If the world wouldn't come to the truth, he would carry it there himself. He began by visiting the public archives downtown. The clerk behind the counter was young and distracted. Her nails painted a bright metallic green. Marcus asked about property deeds from the early 20th century, land surveys from the Reed Farm district. She sighed, but led him to a dimly lit room full of dusty binders and microfilm machines. He spent hours flipping through brittle pages until his eyes ached. Most of the older documents had been transferred to digital storage, which, in practice, meant they had disappeared. Still, he found fragment scanned articles from the local paper, notes from the county registrar, and one name that kept surfacing: Elijah Reed. The discovery stirred something in him, a quiet pride mixed with sorrow. His family hadn't been erased completely. They had just been written out of the story. That night, in a diner off Route 6, Marcus sat nursing black coffee when a voice broke through his thoughts. "You're Reed, right? The guy from the construction site." He turned to see a woman about his age, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, notebook in hand. Her hair was tied back, and she had the alert look of someone always scanning for truth. "Name's Ellie Wilson," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I wrote about Lawson's development deal last year. Got me banned from their press events." She smirked, but her eyes were sharp. "I heard you found something they don't want talked about." Marcus hesitated. He didn't trust easily, especially after the break-in. But there was something steady in her voice, something that reminded him of Henry. Firm but curious, he told her the story, starting with the inheritance, the box, the documents, and the threats. Ellie listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When he finished, she sat back, exhaling slowly. If this is real, it's the biggest story this town's seen in decades. But you need more than papers. You need witnesses, patterns, context. Otherwise, they'll chew you up in court. "I'm not trying to be in court," Marcus said quietly. "I just want what's right to come out." "Same thing in the end," she replied. Over the next week they worked together. Ellie tracked down old municipal employees, retired clerks, anyone who had handled land transfers during the last 50 years. Marcus revisited the warehouse, this time not to hide the truth, but to gather it. He chipped away the patch of fresh concrete he had poured and retrieved the oil-wrapped bundle once more. When he handed it to Ellie, her hands trembled slightly. "You realize what this means?" she said. "These are original documents, handwritten deeds. This isn't just stolen land. It's a conspiracy that's lasted a century." The more they uncovered, the deeper the rot went. Company records revealed that Lawson's corporation had roots stretching back to the same firm that had forced Elijah Reed to sell his property. The names had changed, the logos had evolved, but the lineage was clear. The town's prosperity, its shopping centers, its neat suburban lawns, all built atop land that once belonged to families like Marcus's, families whose names had been buried beneath ledgers and lies. When Ellie published her first draft online, the reaction was immediate. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others venomous. Anonymous accounts called Marcus a liar, a fraud, an opportunist. The development company issued a statement calling the claims unfounded fabrications aimed at derailing progress. Within a day, Marcus's phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, activists, and lawyers. That same night, someone slashed his tires. Another left a note wedged under his windshield. "Go back to where you belong." He stood in the cold street, the paper trembling in his hand, anger rising like heat in his chest. For the first time in his life, he didn't walk away. He took the note, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket like a trophy. Let them see him standing. Ellie was furious when she found out. "They're trying to scare you into silence," she said. "That means we're close." She arranged an interview with a national paper. Marcus was reluctant. He wasn't used to microphones or cameras, but he agreed. During the interview, he spoke plainly, his voice low but steady. "I'm not looking for revenge," he said. "I'm looking for recognition. My family worked this soil before any of them built their towers on it. My great-grandfather didn't sell willingly. He was forced out. They wrote him off as just another colored man who didn't know better. But he did. And now, they know, we remember." The next morning, his face was on the front page of the regional paper. The man who unearthed the past. Some called him brave. Others called him a fool. But the silence that had once surrounded the story was gone. The county opened an investigation, though everyone knew it would move slowly. Corporations had patience. They waited for outrage to fade. But Marcus had patience, too. Years of quiet labor had taught him endurance. One afternoon, as he was leaving Ellie's office, a familiar car pulled up, a black sedan with tinted windows. Phil Lawson stepped out, wearing the same gold watch and forced smile. "Marcus," he said, voice smooth. "Let's talk." Marcus didn't answer. "Look," Phil continued, "this is getting out of hand. You're stirring up things you don't understand. There's no winning here. The people behind this, they don't lose. They just absorb. You're not the first who's tried." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Walk away while you still can." Marcus met his gaze, the memory of the envelope full of cash flashing back. "You already tried to buy me once," he said. "Didn't work then. Won't work now." Phil's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." He turned and walked back to his car, the door slamming shut with finality. The sedan disappeared into the traffic, leaving only the echo of threat behind. Marcus stood still, his pulse steady. For the first time, he realized he wasn't afraid anymore. When the court hearings began, the company sent a team of lawyers dressed in expensive gray suits. They spoke in calm tones about procedural errors and historical context. Ellie sat beside Marcus, stacks of evidence spread across the table. When his turn came to testify, the room went silent. He described everything, how Henry had left him the warehouse, how he found the box, what was inside, and the threats that followed. His words were simple, his voice even, but every sentence cut through the polished defenses like a blade. When he produced the original deeds and the handwritten map, even the opposing counsel leaned forward. The judge called for a recess, her expression unreadable. Outside, in the courthouse corridor, Ellie squeezed his shoulder. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you've already changed something." He nodded, though part of him still doubted. Change came slow in places like Grayville. But later that week, the decision arrived. The court recognized the documents as authentic and acknowledged the Reed family's original ownership. The land could not be returned. The development was too advanced, but compensation would be issued. More importantly, the warehouse and the surrounding acre were to be preserved as a historic site under Marcus's stewardship. The ruling sent shockwaves through the town. The development company's stock plummeted, investors withdrew, and within months, Lawson's empire began to crumble. The first thing Marcus did was repair the warehouse roof. He painted the doors red, the color of iron and memory, and cleared out the rusted tools. The county offered funding to convert it into a community center, the Elijah Reed Foundation for Historical Justice. He accepted on one condition: the concrete patch where the box had been buried would remain untouched. It would stay as it was, a scar and a testament. When the grand opening came, the sky was the color of clay, heavy with rain that refused to fall. People gathered under tents, neighbors, former workers, even some who had once mocked him. A plaque was unveiled near the entrance, etched in bronze. This land once belonged to those whose voices were silenced. May the truth they left behind never be buried again. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching children run through the grass that had grown over what was once a field of rubble. The air smelled of wet soil and fresh paint. Ellie joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he replied. "We did what should have been done a long time ago." Later, when the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Marcus stayed behind. He walked to the far corner of the warehouse, where the concrete still bore the faint marks of his first drill. He knelt down, pressing his palm against the cool surface. Beneath it, he imagined Henry's voice, Elijah's voice, all the voices that had been denied but not destroyed. He closed his eyes and whispered, "It's over now. They can't take it again." Outside, Thunder rolled across the valley, echoing off the hills. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and insistent, striking the roof like applause. He stepped outside and watched as the storm broke open, washing the dust from the red doors, soaking the grass, filling the air with the scent of renewal. For years, Marcus had been a man who lived quietly, who built for others, and owned nothing of his own. Now, standing on the ground his family once tilled, he felt something he hadn't known before. Not victory, but belonging. The land no longer whispered loss. It breathed again. And as the rain turned to downpour, Marcus tilted his face toward the sky, letting it fall. The truth was no longer buried. It had roots now, and it would grow. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Watch our next stories to discover more hidden truths like this one, and share this video with someone who believes that justice always finds its way.